Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30th episode of Kouryer Podcast. Today, I'm joined with Curran. He's a creator of kinetic sculptures and installations from Seattle, USA. With that out of the way, could you please give us a little introduction on how you got into visual arts and design?
Yeah, I've always been interested in art. It started as a child. I played with wire a lot. I drew a lot. I stuck things together a lot. Always doing something creative to keep myself entertained. But I didn't start getting into kinetics until high school when my teacher had showed the class a video on Alexander Calder, who's I believe a modernist sculptor. He invented mobiles, so those little things that hang above kids' cribs. So he did those, and yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. As soon as I saw that, my whole world shifted, and then everything started becoming kinetic.
Oh, pretty interesting. And well, were you originally studying art and design, or you were pursuing another career path?
No, I think I knew at a pretty young age that art is what I wanted to do. I couldn't really figure out if I was good at anything else, so I was like, let's just keep doing art. And I got a lot of encouragement from the people around me, so kind of always going forward and pushing against that. Although I was always said that, or told growing up, like, you better find a second career, which is, I think, something that a lot of artists hear from family, relatives, and friends.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a common theme, even I don't think just in USA, like all around the world in general, where people usually aren't that supportive of their the younger member of their family or even their kids to follow art, because they usually want the stable route, the financially stable route, and I mean, that's kind of understandable, like a relatable issue. So how does, sorry, I wrote the wrong question. What is your main branch of design that you're focusing on? Of course, in the introduction, I already mentioned that you work on kinetic sculptures and installations. And what's the main branch of design you're focusing on? Like, would you go more in depth? And also tell us about your experience from the start of it until now.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've done a lot of different things since graduating college. Maybe it's over a decade now. I graduated in 2006, and with a focus on showing in galleries, just regular sculptures. And I showed regularly, at least once a year, with a solo show in galleries. What was the question? Where did everything start? Yeah, so I graduated in 2006, and then, with a focus on, or at least this idea that I would be showing all my work in galleries and trying to make my living doing that. I wasn't dissuaded from that, because I did start showing in galleries, and I was having solo shows at least once a year, but it's really hard to make a living doing that, because you're spending all your time working towards this one show. And then, because all my pieces take so long to make, to even trying to produce a 12-piece show in one gallery, that's one piece a month. And that's really cranking it out every single day. But after that, and not really after that, but it kind of started picking up steam when I was doing some public commissions for buildings here in Seattle. So my scale of work popped up. it got larger, more involved. I brought in some digital experts where I could, or programmers, where I could actually start activating the space. Like one of the first large public commissions I did was for a building in partnership with Skanska Architects, where they designed a green building and they wanted to have a sculpture that would somehow tell the people inhabiting that building what the energy usage of that building was. So kind of like this physical barometer for the energy goals of the building. And so I created this big Corten steel wall with all these cracks running through it, and then these brass flowers, like wildflowers, kind of pushing out through these cracks, and they would open and close in time with the energy goals of the building. And I mean, that was something I wouldn't have been able to do without like bumping up and bringing in a collaborator into the work. And then from there, I got a few more public commissions or public-private commissions. And also, while all that was going on, I was working with a theater company, doing these really involved kind of, I guess you could say, like avant-garde in the most like pretentious sense of the word of avant-garde. Like they were really difficult shows to watch, but I love them. I love them so much. Real dark, but also beautiful. And I think working with the director and working with these groups of people, it really informed how I see space and how I see like the potential of work beyond just the wall. And then, you know, I work at a college right now as the studio tech. So I've been using the college's sculpture lab as pretty much my like de facto studio. So I have all the toys for free, laser cutting. We're about to do a major remodel, and we'll be getting some full scale CNC routing and plasma cutting. So
pretty
very
interesting. But
that.
if I'm not mistaken, I actually watched one like a 3-minute video from an Instagram page about you, like a mini interview kind of. I think it was Glowforge or something.
Sure.
The name of the page, I don't quite remember. And one of the things that stuck to me, you said that you prefer like cold methods, like you don't really prefer like welding and.
No. Yeah, that video was from like 2014. So I'm not. So it's kind of interesting. When I was in college, I knew that I wasn't going to have a space for years and years and years to be able to weld or do some of these larger industrial techniques that you see some artists use. So I kind of like narrowed my focus down into like these very specific kind of just sewing the metal together or twisting the metal together. So I didn't have to worry about all the like getting an oxygen tank and having a fire in my apartment, which I just couldn't have. So I made that choice early on. I can weld. I actually teach welding now a little bit, but it's too robust for what I'm trying to do. I mean, not to say that I won't use it in the future. It is like a skill to put in your back pocket. I think a lot of art making is about finding a new skill or a new technique. Just experimenting, doing things wrong is really important, because in that wrongness, you might be able to find some type of repeatable beauty that you can then use in your own works that maybe somebody else hasn't yet. And so I put those in my back pockets and use them later.
Awesome. And I mean, I wanted to mention that because because I heard that like when I was doing a background check on you about like you don't prefer like you prefer cold methods, and you were talking about CNC and laser cutting. I was like, isn't that? I don't think that's really cold. That's
right. No, yeah. I've bumped up. I've actually got myself a Glowforge. I just ordered it the other day. There's all the boxes and everything.
Awesome.
It's pretty big. And I wouldn't have gotten it unless I think it's like the idea is I don't use them if I can't reliably use them. Right now I'm in a house, top floor of a house. There's no buildings around me. I can vent out the window.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that in an apartment. So have you ever heard, never mind. That's
it's
kind of
fine.
like a weird segue, but yeah, like the color blue wasn't really in the lexicon until we were able to reliably use or reliably produce and use that color. So if you go back into Homer's Odyssey or the Odyssey, like he doesn't write about blue at all. He talks about the wine red sea, or even like children. There was like some guy who had a kid who also like studied color, and for the longest time he tried not saying blue or like mention blue in front of his child, and then like one day he was like, could you tell me what color the sky is? And the kid's like, it's white, you know. And there's a really interesting podcast about this. Do you ever listen to
I heard about it, but
Radiolab?
No, actually I haven't listened to it.
It's a really great one. But they do kind of science-y, weird kind of things regarding those.
Kind of like Mythbusters, right?
Regarding those types of. Yeah, a little bit, but they're not so much. It's I guess you could say it's parallel to Mythbusters a little bit. Yeah. It's talking about they usually take one topic a week, and they kind of pull it apart. Like, what is sleep, or what is color, or what are these things, and then they kind of deep dive into it. But anyway, back to the reliability of your tools. If I didn't have the reliability of the tool, I figure out some other way to use.
Interesting.
This system.
Now let's go to the next question. How does your design process usually go anytime you want to start working on a design project, whether it be maybe the design project is just, I don't know, designing a headpiece like you did for which we're going to get into later in the episode, or just any project?
Yeah, I usually start with I don't know how to design in the computer three-dimensionally, so I'm constantly grabbing pieces of paper, folding them up, twisting them around, and like start with really simple physical models to either find the silhouette of the shape that I want or the kinetic motion that I want. And then start refining it a little bit. I'll do like, I use Illustrator a lot because that program, it just makes things flat. I can cut it out, super simple with the laser cutter. And then I just kind of jump from there. I mean, it's difficult because every project kind of starts in an interesting place. I mean, when you're trying to ideate your concepts, where do these ideas come from? When I'm just trying to think of like a good example of like a design process, I guess we can jump to the Iris piece because that's like a good example. I was contacted by Iris van Herpen back in 2019 at around September, and we started developing this kinetic headpiece for the Paris Fashion Week. And and you could see on the Instagram, I do have that one kind of silhouette of kind of this fan wrapping around my head in a horizontal configuration. And that was the silhouette that I wanted to try and produce for these crowns. And it went through a lot of iterations, several different motors. I actually have 4 different prototypes before I finally got to the final one. I actually missed the deadline for the 2020 show. So those headpieces were originally supposed to be in her Sensory Seas exhibition, but neither of us were happy with how the motion was going. I have an acrylic model. I have a stainless steel model. I have a model that we tried painting white, and none of those worked. None of the movements were either too shuttery and didn't move with the fluidity that they needed to have. So yeah, I think a lot of the design iterations and a lot of the coming to functional elements of the designs, it's just whittling away, or trying to find the correct material. What was different about this last design for the crowns was I started using this white material called Duralar, which is a polyester drawing paper made by Graphics, and it has a natural spring to it. And so I was able to utilize that spring to help pull the feathers down and to kind of like create tension on the threads that weave through the crown as they go up. So it didn't have that stutter that some of the other models had. And it was a slight eureka moment as I was half asleep, you know. I think solutions do come when you're in kind of those liminal states between awake and asleep.
You're in the flow zone, basically.
I usually find answers there. Yeah, but I'm like in bed, kind of sleeping or trying to take a nap.
Sometimes those ideas hit us when we're in the flow. Like, for example, people explain sometimes when they're running outside or they're taking a shower. Or I think it was in the journals of Leonardo da Vinci that he said that sometimes, a lot of times, his big ideas came to him when, for example, he was laying down and there was like a light of the candle reflecting on the ceiling, and it was of course the candle of the wind just made the light, you know, just wiggle a bit, and he would just get mesmerized by that motion, and you know, his brain would go on autopilot, and you know, boom, the ideas just came to him. The solutions to the problems he had while designing, like it, you know, it's in a sense it's like that, you know, when you get in the flow. Kind of, it's basically the concept of meditation. You know, that's like what you try to manually do with meditation.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the healthiest way to do it. You know, just kind of like shutting off one part of your brain and letting the other part go. I know that there's been desperate times where I'm like, well, maybe I can work myself into a manic state and like come up with an idea. So it's like, I'll like not sleep, smoke too many cigarettes, and like have a ton of coffee, and like just kind of be running around my apartment being like, I have to have an idea. Come to me now. That's only worked once, so I don't do that
that's
anymore.
Not very... that doesn't help. I mean, because I used to do the same a lot. I used to be like extremely addicted to caffeine, like energy drinks, coffee, you name it. And like it would came to a point that my sleep schedule was so bad, like it still happens. Like it even happened like a month ago. Like I would just sleep for every 2 days. And it wasn't, and here, yes,
oh, no.
it is. And it wasn't like that. I was tired and all the time, like I was hyper alert, you know, I was sharp, you know, like I snorted a line of cocaine, but I didn't. I just, my brain was like that. Like I honestly, like the most extreme case of it was last year in the spring, I think, not the 2020 spring. I mean, like the 2019.
Right.
Like I remember one morning I haven't slept for a day, and in the morning of the night that I should be sleeping, it was 7 a.m. and I was bored, and I just opened up my Strava app. I don't know if you know it's for running and basically cycling, and I just turned it on and it started to run like for 7 kilometers and went back, and I was still sharp, you know, like, you know, so, yeah, it was so bad.
Oh my god.
But I don't recommend it to everyone. Sleep is super important. Just crazy.
I mean, I get 8 hours of sleep now, so
awesome. Some people
that's my
barely
thing.
get even 6 hours.
Yeah. I can't function off of 6 hours.
I should at least have 8 hours. And well, let's go to the next question. Could you tell us about your experience of the first installation you ever made, and also the first exhibition you held as well? Like, how are the feelings? Like, how was your experience? Were there any mistakes involved? Any funny stories about those?
Well, I mean, my college BFA show, I don't know, that was kind of the first exhibition. And that was received really well. I don't really have any images of it, at least no good images of it. But I think the main piece that I had in that show, it really got a lot of people excited about the work that I would eventually do. I made a full-size, life-size human skeleton out of wire. And I built a box to go around it, like the frame of a box. And there was a motor that would propel this life-size skeleton to walk. And then in its hand, it had another box with another skeleton in it. And the large skeleton, the life-size one, was turning a crank, also all hooked up to this one motor. So the life-size one was turning a crank for the second-size skeleton. And then the second-size skeleton was also walking. And in its hand, it had a third tiny skeleton inside of another box. And it was turning the crank for that. So it was kind of like this fractal, like shrinking down of like the same skeleton walking and walking and walking. And I thought that was a really good piece. Maybe one day I'll revisit it somewhere somehow, but not yet. I've done that before, where you go back in time and like look at a piece that you made, and if it wasn't made correctly, revisit it now with the idea that I'm gonna finally complete that idea or produce the idea as close to what was inside my head originally, but you just didn't have like the vocabulary or the technical knowledge to really produce it. And so, yeah, I think that was the main one. I mean, I've had a lot of follies in the art making process because, my work is kinetic. And so if one thing is off a little bit, the whole machine breaks down. I've had nightmare scenarios where a gear gets jammed and it destroys it, so I have to remake that whole thing. I've gone back to a few of my public works and had to repair those just because of either user error. I did a sculpture in another state. This was a nightmare. I did a sculpture in another state that was, we had a week to install it. It was in this hospital. It was beautiful. It worked. It was like this big undulating acrylic and aluminum sculpture that had diffraction grating film in the aluminum, or not in the aluminum, in the acrylic. And so when light passed through it, it kind of cast these subtle rainbows throughout the entire lobby of this hospital. And so it was really beautiful and subtle and whatnot. But in my contract, I specifically stipulated, this thing can't be running all day. It needs time for the motor to cool down. It needs to follow these steps. And lo and behold, they didn't ever install the timer. And I told them to, even after I saw, hey, this switch needs to be on a timer. It can't be left on. And because the machine kind of moved very slowly, maybe 4 RPM, so one full revolution every minute, or 4 revolutions every minute, sorry. It wasn't readily noticeable that it was on, but what ended up happening was they had left it on for almost a week, and just the motor burnt out. It just should not have been on. And then, of course, they're like, well, you need to come and fix it. I'm like, listen, this is the contract, and you didn't follow the contract, so no, I'll send you another motor because I want it to work, but I'm not flying out there to fix it. So everybody needs to read their contracts.
Contract is that it's kind of common sense when the creator of work says that it needs. You don't even need the creator to tell it to you. You shouldn't. Motors just overheat. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, it's just obvious. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I had a couple of questions while I was going through your stuff about your artworks, and I checked your website. You had like a couple of exhibitions. Now let me bring them up again. One of them.
I just updated some of the things,
pardon?
so it might be a little weird. I just updated some of the website, so I don't know if I broke
actually
anything
it's
yet.
fine. The user interface is not buggy or anything. I want to I want you to explain the story behind the artworks you made for two of your exhibitions. One of them is well, let's go through them one by one. First, let's start by Parable of Gravity.
Okay.
Tell us the story behind it, and in general, anything we should know.
Sure. I mean, that's the one that's closest to the front of my mind right now. So, Parable of Gravity was, in a lot of my work, I'm always kind of thinking, well, I don't know if it's the same for other artists, but I always kind of have this hidden narrative, and maybe it might not even be hidden, but it's in the back of my mind. And for this show, I've always been kind of, not always, but like in the back of my mind, I'm always dealing with these existential dreads that we have. I read the news all the time. I'm constantly listening to NPR. And there's a lot of fear that we hear. And it just kind of made me think like, well, Christ, everything's collapsing. And in 2019, I went to Barcelona with my partner, and we stayed in the Gothic Quarter, and we're looking at all these cathedrals, and it just kind of struck me that here are these buildings that get constructed in one person's lifetime and then are finished in another. So it's like this idea of a century project, this longer plan. And what makes a culture, a society, a subset of people able to have that type of resiliency in the face of time and change to produce this massive undertaking. And so for me, Parable of Gravity is this, it's kind of like this signpost that, hey, things are collapsing, but we have this chance, and the door is closing, it feels like, to possibly fix or mitigate the worst of it. And, that's one aspect of it. In the exhibition, you can see this large kind of steel, or it's an aluminum structure with all these tessellated triangles. And that specific piece was taken from an asteroid, Gaspera 951, which was photographed by the Galileo spacecraft on its way to Jupiter. And it's actually the first photograph of an asteroid, a close-up photograph of an asteroid that we've ever had. And that was in 1991. So it feels like that wasn't really that long ago for me, since I was born in 81. But it was like this very small signpost, or like this footnote in humanity's history on this planet, and all the history that it took to get this tiny-ish little device on a rocket, flung into the void, and somehow like pass this giant mountain just floating in the middle of nothing on its way to another like giant thing. And so I thought that was incredible. And what in the tessellation of the sculpture, I placed a rose window, or at least the illusion of a rose window. And so for me, when you're talking about deep time, humanity, and like our psychological relationships with nature and how we deal with them, I wanted to incorporate both this science aspect of it, the part of humanity that pulls apart reality and wants to investigate it, and then this other part of humanity that that tries and create answers from the void. And I always think back to like pre-industrial civilization, before we were able to like make gas lamps, and every single night was pitch black if there was no moon. And just imagine like the Milky Way just strung out above your head, and like how could you not think that there was some great beyond? But then as soon as the enlightenment comes and we start peeling it apart, and we're like, oh shit, maybe the earth does revolve around the sun. And that was a huge shift in like in the human like psyche regarding like our place in the universe. And I just found that was really important. And so in the exhibition, I think that we do have to have this kind of greater shift in our perspective of where we are on this planet and what resources we have left. And not to ramble on too much, but I go back and I think about mass extinctions on the planet, and there's been 5 mass extinctions, notable mass extinctions. But one of them that I like to point to is one of the first ones, when Earth was basically one big giant ocean and Pangea was a thing. And our oceans kind of turned into this green soup with plankton, right? And so it was sucking in all the CO2 and then belching out oxygen. And oxygen is a cooling gas. And so what happened was the Earth plunged into this snowball effect. It was like the first greatest ice age. And that killed off all the plankton. But what it did was it seeded our atmosphere. It changed the chemistry of our atmosphere and gave us the amount of oxygen that we have now, which allowed the next step in our evolution. And so when you walk into the Parable of Gravity exhibition, there's these disintegrating towers and then all these flowers growing from that. And so it's kind of like, even though we may be gone in the future, there will be something that happens next. And it's arrogant almost to think that we'll always be here. But I would love to try and have us always be here, if not only for the reason to like at least give the universe some consciousness for the short period of time that we're here.
All right. And by the way, for anyone who's wondering, the exhibition, for if you're near, is it being held in Seattle? Yeah, for anyone who's in Seattle or living in nearby states, I mean, of course, you can. The exhibition will be still up and running until April 17th of this year. So if you're interested, do definitely try to check it out. And the next one we were supposed to talk about is Escaping Earth, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Yes, Escaping Earth. I have two, aside from the story behind it, I also had 2 specific questions about this, which first, I mean, of course, please do go ahead and let us know the story behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Escaping Earth, it's kind of, that exhibition was kind of my precursor for Parable of Gravity. It was down in Houston at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And it was the first time I was able to display that large tessellated asteroid. I lovingly refer to it as my space potato, because it does look like a potato. And also the hanging figure. I've titled both these pieces individually. The hanging figure is We Spoke Like This to Remember, and the asteroid is, I've titled it Anchor of Janus, because it's Janus is this Greek god of beginnings and endings, transition, time, things like that. You'd often see the two-faced god above doorways before you're entering. It's like beginning of war, ending of war, things like that. And I mean, I guess in the Escaping Earth a lot of the things in that exhibition were leading into the parable of gravity. I have some paintings of some asteroids that I had done. There's actually a painting of the Gaspar 951 asteroid in that show. I made the foundation of a home out of these Himalayan salt bricks, and then sculpted wooden wheat growing out of it. I called it Jericho, which I don't know if that's the best title for it. But what I wanted to do with that was kind of allude to this deeper sense of like how we've taken land and almost sowed it with I don't know. Like, have you ever heard of the term like to salt the earth? Yeah, so it came about kind of around in the Middle Ages, and people would like, the idea was, oh yeah, a conquering army comes through your town and then they salt your field so you can't grow any more crops. But salt was too expensive back then, so it wasn't actually happening. But there was this ritual that where around the perimeter of a field, you would like salt it a little bit, you know, kind of making this ring, kind of claiming it as like, this is now ours. And so I kind of wanted to allude to that with the foundation, this crumbling foundation in Jericho. And just what are the implications of like when we claim a piece of the earth as our own, and then when we have generation after generation after generation living on the bones of the people that came before them, how do we care for that land? Like, do we take up the ownership or custodialship of that space? And then some of the other pieces in the exhibition were more like older work. This was the first like large exhibition that I've done, a solo exhibition that I've done in a space. And so it was so I think the concepts were a little disjointed, but I do think everything fed into each other because I was showing work from all the way back from like 2010 to 2020. So there was kind of like this weaving in and out of past ideas and future ideas. So it was a little bit more difficult to kind of put a pin in what I was pointing at.
Actually, my two questions got answered. One of them was about the same figure that you had in Parable of Gravity, which you already said it's kind of like the precursor to that. And my other question was about the installation of the Himalayan salt bricks and the wheat strands, which, you know, I got my answer. Yeah. So, all right. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is you did a series of works with, if I'm not mistaken, with Iris Van Herpen, and she's for anyone who's curious, she's like one of the most famous fashion designers right now, in a very avant-garde style, trying to involve technology in her works. And actually, I saw on her website, the series is called Roots of Rebirth. I want you to talk about that a bit, and also, like in one of her posts, also she even mentioned you designed a headpiece for one of her works. I mean, I'm going to show it later in the edited version of the podcast. I mean, anything I'm talking about right now, or we're talking about, I'm going to edit it later so everyone knows what we're talking about. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like I was kind of saying before, the collaboration started last year or 2 years ago in 2019 and missed the deadline for Sensory Seas. And so I was actually building these with this kind of underlying notion that the Sensory Seas exhibition is beautiful. So is this Roots of Rebirth. But I was building these kind of with the idea that there's these stingrays, or kind of like these models were just flowing down the runway, kind of being pushed or guided by these. I wasn't privy to the roots of rebirth. I didn't know that was the direction that the collection was going to take. I think it's beautiful. I don't think that like it. I don't know how to describe it. It was when I was collaborating with Iris, there was like, I wasn't quite always privy to all the information, and so I was kind of working in this space where I had a freedom to kind of like push whatever boundaries that I could push. And the first headpiece that I did, it was this larger feather piece that sat on, I think the model's name is Natalia or something. She's very famous.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I'm just reading her ad, and it's just Nata Supernova, which it's probably Natalie or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was the first one, and then like both Iris and me and the whole team were super excited about that. Like, we finally got a functioning headpiece to work, and so we kind of talked a little bit about the best way to do the next one. And then she was like, bring it in a little bit and kind of have these curly things. Actually, I did the curly thing, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so we talked a little bit, and then like we came back and forth with some designs and had the second piece. And so the mechanism is basically the same for the first as the second, but it did take a little bit more editing and balancing of each one of these lifting and falling elements. And now, if you want to know a super secret, but it's not that secret, who knows if it'll actually work? Because the first time we missed the deadline because I just couldn't get the mechanics working. But we're going to be producing a dress for spring, which I'm excited for. Yeah. You're okay.
Yeah. No. You know when water just jumps out? The time wasn't perfect. Yeah, that's good. So you were saying?
Yeah. We're going to be producing a dress for spring. So hopefully that is functional and beautiful, because I don't think either of us want something half-assed walking down the runway. These things do take time. Yeah, they take time. They take a lot of balance, a lot of iterations. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I just got that glow forge, so I can help produce like these things at a faster pace. True. Scaling up the work.
And the last thing about the section I want to ask you is, I think, I mean, in your bio, it says make reservations at Mad Art Seattle. And also in the Mad Art Seattle bio, it says Mad Art is a contemporary arts organization that supports artists to create new installation-based work that expands their professional practice now. My main question is, how does exactly Mad Art Seattle organization support an artist? Like, do they provide material, or equipment? Like, I'm kind of confused about it. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's pretty unique as organization. There, like most organizations, there needs large organizations like this. There needs to be some funding behind it, and it's private, actually. So the main push, or the owner, the director of Mad Art, Allison Milliman, has been a great supporter of the arts here in Seattle. She started, I want to say 2009, 2008, doing these smaller kind of community-centered projects down kind of by the waterfront here in Seattle. And she would bring in maybe 10, 20 artists, give them like a couple $1,000s to do like these installations that would be hosted in these spaces over the summer. In 2010, I worked with her and some other artists to do these installations in parks. There's this one, the one that I did it's unlike any other piece that I did, but it had this theatrical element where it was this large disc, this grass disc, kind of boring. But the main reason why I made that disc was it was kind of that whole park was on top of a reservoir. So there was this understructure. And so I wanted to expose the understructure. So there's this wooden oblique cone underneath the grass. And so it's just this big disc kind of tilted on its side. And it was just so like serendipitous that my friend happened to be walking by with a watering can. And I was just like, hey, you need to give me that watering can. And he's like, okay. And so we put the watering can on the sculpture, and there's a water feature, maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 yards away from it. And the sculpture existed in the park in the summer during the hottest months in Seattle. And the community kind of took ownership of it. And so they were taking this water can from the sculpture, walking it over to the fountain, filling it up, and then going back to the sculpture and keeping it watered throughout the whole summer. And it became almost this performative thing where, you know, if you're not on the sculpture, you would be on this little hill over here watching the people on the sculpture doing this thing or whatever they were doing. It was fascinating. It was like this kind of framing of mundane life in kind of this theatrical way. I don't know how else to describe it. I've never done anything like it, and that's fine, but I'm really happy with that piece. Subtle beauty in it.
No, it's fine.
I'm sorry, I went on a tangent.
The question was, how does exactly Mad Art Seattle supports artists?
Yes. Yeah. They support artists through funding. The space itself, the Mad Art, they will throw weddings or other kinds of events in the space. Actually, during the opening of Parabole of Gravity, I was talking with a couple and they want to have a wedding in that space. And I'm like, this is a dark exhibition. Like, are you sure? But it's also really beautiful. So I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting. So maybe somebody will have some weddings in the middle of my sculpture, which I'm fine with letting it go and having it be that. And we're going to probably have some dancers come into the space and film some beautiful dance. So
true.
You know, it's a stage.
They just have free stage props for their wedding. So it's a win-win. So the next question is, who are your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
I'm going to ruin both these names. Dana Al-Hadid, I think, is her name, and David Ahmed.
It's pronounced Ahmed, I think.
God. Yes. Thank you. Right. Yeah. Okay. He's a Canadian artist. I don't know where Dana is from.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think maybe if the guy is biracial, maybe it's Dana. But if not, maybe because we have a name Donna in Farsi and Arabic, maybe that's his name. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one's a guy and one's a girl.
That could work. And Donna could be a girl name too.
Donna. I can send you links to them so you can pronounce them. But those two artists I really like. There's some other kinetic artists like Arthur Ganson. I got a lot of inspiration from. His kinetic sculptures are so complicated, I could never reproduce them. I could stare at them for hours and kind of figure out how they work. But I could never reproduce it. But they were gorgeous. Very big inspiration to kind of like keep pushing the mechanics behind each piece. There's local artists here in Seattle that I found a lot of inspiration from. Gala Bent, who was actually a teacher at the college. I don't think she knows like how much her work was really inspiring for me. Like I remember seeing some of her paintings and I was like, well, I need to turn that into a sculpture. I worked as an artist assistant with Katie Stone And that was a huge influence on teaching me how to scale up my work. I think it's really important if students post college can get internships with working artists that are working at a large scale. It's super helpful for them, I think, if they're willing to keep an open mind and just kind of listen and kind of learn as they're going. Mandy Greer is another one. She's a textile artist, and I don't think so much like I don't use textiles in my work, but I think the amount of the way that her pieces look that are stitched together, they're very I always look at them as kind of like this horror vacuum of like texture and I don't know. They're just really gorgeous.
And
I guess.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I thought you wouldn't finish.
That's
it. All right. So, and speaking of mediums, what mediums do you mostly work in, and why?
It's interesting. I feel like I guess wire would be the number one. It's the closest to. It's what I use the most, but I haven't used any wire in about a year. I think the way that I work is I find a new material and I go about through this period, this R&D period, where I'm trying to push the limits of what it can do or how it could be used in a piece of art. And I mean, right now I'm using mostly laser cut Duralar and acrylic, and then just some like brass wire and little motors. You know, I wouldn't limit myself to one material. Yeah, I wouldn't limit myself to one material. It's whatever the occasion calls for.
Yes.
Monochromatic is good though.
And well, next question is, what is the main subject of your artworks and what made them interesting to you?
I think on a broader scope, I think the simplest way to say it is humanity's psychological relationship with nature, and nature in the sense of not like a garden, but nature in the sense that if I have a child and I'm living out in the woods, a bear is very much likely going to eat my child. Like that kind of nature, like the real nature, not this curated nature that we often see and talk about. Because nature does not give a shit about us. It does not care. It does what it does. It's this force, and I think that we as people have been doing as much as we can to negate that. I mean, we have all these cultural prosthetics. I mean, we live in houses, we have clothes, we have all these comforts, hot water. We've spent, I guess, hundreds of years actually, because we're not really that old, making these innovations to kind of make ourselves more comfortable in our environments. And I think that, I mean, I wouldn't ever give any of those up, but I think it is in direct antithesis of what nature is. And so I think that that's like a really interesting, like that liminal space between what our ideas of nature are and what nature actually is.
All right. And what technologies and softwares do you mostly use for your works? And I mean, by softwares, I mean, or technologies, I mean, it could be paper, pencil, even, you know, just what tools do you use for the whole design process? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. So when I start producing work for a new series, I usually just kind of cut out paper, figure out the silhouettes, and then from there I would jump into either laser cutting, refining it in Illustrator on the computer. That's what I'm doing right now. Before, I would just be building very tiny little kinetic models. I would call them movement sketches, which were usually not beautiful, but they would at least get the idea across. So then I could iterate on it and refine it to become used in a piece of art.
All right. And any advice and tips for a good portfolio and resume for someone who wants to get into like becoming an artist in your field, basically?
Advice. Well, keep working. Always move forward with your designs. I don't have very good advice because I don't even know how I'm where I'm at right now. I think it's a confluence of events. If you keep working towards your visions and your ideas, either regarding new compositions or activation devices, and even though they might fail the first time, you have to keep working on it. Like with the Iris headpieces, I was ready to throw every single one of them at the wall because they just weren't working, and it was super disappointing. Thank God I was contacted again the next year so we could revisit them. And, you know, the first crack at it, I was able to get it functioning again. So I think there's this term in education where we call it grit. And it's like this metric of being able to like keep working at the problem until you solve it. That is the most advice that I can give. Muster up grit to keep going forward.
What you're saying is completely makes sense, because obviously, and not just in art, when you work hard towards a vision or a goal or a craft, like, you know, you hear these stories that people, you know, get super successful after, like, I don't know, practicing for a short amount of time. But basically, when you work towards something, the opportunities related to that will obviously, you'll find them. It's not universe or karma doing something. It's just basically facts, you know? Like, I mean, obviously, of course, if you're in the field of art, you're going to eventually, you know, get, you know, these opportunities, you know? Yes.
Hopefully. I mean, it's like a good, here's some like practical advice. Try getting your search rating higher if you can. Like, get things linked to your website. I mean, I know that one project that I was talking about earlier with the kinetic flowers, the barometer for the energy usage of the building. I got that job because I was the first choice, or I mean, I was the first search that came up when they Googled kinetic artist Seattle. So then they looked at my work and they're like, hey, maybe this guy can do it. And so I just convinced them that I could.
Awesome.
And then I did it.
And yeah, I mean, of course, having it's good to have a portfolio. Like, I'm not really sure what is like a good platform for a kinetic artist to have a portfolio on. I guess Instagram, Behance, I think those are usually for, you know, illustrators, you know. But I think definitely, regardless of like what your design profession is, you definitely need a website and link your portfolios to that website. Like, I mean, it's a game changer. And
absolutely.
What are you working on right now that you can tell us about? What kind of project is it? Of course, I mean, if it's something where there's an NDA involved, I mean, we can skip the question.
No, I don't have any NDAs right now. The project that I'm working on right now is a kinetic dress with Iris Van Herpen. So we'll see. Hopefully that'll work out. And then we're just going to see what happens. I don't have any major things planned. I'm just kind of seeing how this exhibition goes. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe whoever will be like, hey, this is the end of my career. I've peaked too early. Probably not. Let's not put that into the universe. But yeah, I mean, I have ideas in the back of my head. I would really like to make a deep sea hydrothermal vent, because I don't know, I just think that they're really fascinating. It's like this whole ecology that exists without the sun. I think that that's really interesting, and kind of goes along with some of the things that I was talking about in Parable of Gravity, and like what comes after the collapse and what life can look like.
Awesome. And so, all right, the next question is kind of like, we're getting kind of to the end of the podcast, and This is the question I like. Well, I ask everyone, and I always get very interesting answers too. Imagine right now. I'm just rephrasing the question, of course, right now. Imagine right now that you got a text, and basically it says that $1 million has been deposited to your bank account. All right. What's going to happen? Of course, you're not you. It's going to make you not worry about bills anymore, and stuff like that, which eventually will make you not, which eventually makes you in a state that you have a lot of free time, And what skill or craft would you pursue in that free time? That's the question.
Oh yeah. Well, first I would invest
Bitcoin,
everything in the stock market right now. Yeah, all that. This fucking year for the stock market's been wild. Anyway, $1 million. I don't know. I mean, $1 million is a lot of money, isn't it? But it's not like enough money to do like a really big thing. I feel like I've talked with my partner about this before. If I won like the Mega Millions, I would definitely build like a art center with like studio spaces and stuff like that. So I'm kind of like, I would want to build a building, like something that would have a legacy. That would be the thing if I had enough money. But $1 million won't do that.
I'm sorry, not but for the scale that question, but I didn't mean what would you do with $1 million? I mean, sorry.
Oh yeah. Sorry. What skills would I learn? Well, I would go back to school. And learn how to do 3D print or do all the technology stuff, and then probably finally get a usable studio space to put all those toys in.
And well, we've come to the last section of the podcast. With everything that's been said and done, to conclude, I'll be discussed. Give us a roadmap for someone who is zero in visual arts and design and wants to get to the place you are in terms of skill set. Like, for example, from zero to becoming an amateur kinetic sculptor. Give us a roadmap.
Roadmap to becoming an amateur kinetic sculptor. I would pick up this book called 501 Mechanical Motions. That would be a good place to start. I would do as much investigating into other kinetic artists, other types of people doing work that you're interested in. Go to school if you can afford it, or do your own research, and then just keep making. And if your project fails, pick it up and do it again.
All right, that just sounds like a pretty straightforward answer. No. I don't know how to answer it really. Because for a lot of other stuff, like you have to learn the fundamentals of this or that, But something like kinetic sculpting, it's because it's such a practical thing, That's what I meant. Not that your answer was, but your answer was pretty perfect. I mean, that was interesting. All right, and we've come to the end of the podcast. Thank you to everyone who's been watching and listening. And by the way, where can people contact you if they had any questions or?
Yeah, they could. You can contact me through my website. It would be best to contact me through my website rather than my email, because I get a notification saying that it's art related. So go to CaseyCurran.com.
Yeah, I'll put it in the captions.
CASEYCU. Oh, okay. You put it in the caption. I won't spell it out.
And well, there we have it, folks. We've come to the end of the episode, and see you all in the next episode. Have a good day. Bye.